Ron's worked in product design engineering, product development, product planning, program management, technical sales, business development, automotive consulting. That's a lot of different fields he's been in. He was employed at 20 years for Ford, where he was business program manager of the 1994 Mustang product. And he has for the last 8 years, for 8 years before, in between, he was an independent international consultant. And in 2002, he became the director of business development for Roush. I won't go through everything he's done, but I will tell you he's got a lot of international experience. He's worked with developing business plans for a body shop for GM in China. He's worked in Brazil. With a name like Muccioli, it's no surprise he's been involved with people in Italy, Fiat, Destaco, and he's also worked with 2 non-automotive firms, so he's got a real broad background. Educationally, he got his Bachelor of Science in Industrial Management in a school you may think a little bit about or be familiar with. It's called Lawrence Technological Institute. And at that time, I don't know, was it technological?
It was Lawrence Tech.
Lawrence
That's
Tech.
it, simple.
Okay. Then he got his Master of Business Administration with minors in Marketing and Finance at the University of Detroit. And so he's got a lot of background in automotive engineering, and today he's going to talk about the automotive business strategy. Mr. Muccioli.
Okay. Well, this is my first time in front of students in, I'm not sure, a long time. My first time in front of college students ever. So bear with me a little bit as we go through this. I'm going to use a PowerPoint, but I'm also going to go through a lot of explanation of terms on the whiteboard. And there will be a question and answer period afterwards, but if you get confused as I'm going through some of these terms, please just ask a question in between. We'll try that. Some of these terms, although they're very common to myself and to Greg, they could be very foreign to you because you really haven't been exposed to the automotive industry. This whole lecture is about the business of the automotive industry, which is a difficult one today. We'll maybe talk about that a little later. Okay, let's see if I can get it to the first slide here. That is not the one we want. Somehow there's something missing out of here, Greg. Well, we'll ad-lib the first slide, okay? The first slide in this package that I handed out to you is what is it all about? A business decision needs to be made by the automobile company on what vehicle to change and when. During the next 2 hours or hour plus, we will review the parameters and rationale of that business decision. I'm sure that all of you have thought, well, why didn't Toyota change that car last year? Why are they going to change it 2 years from now? Why did Ford Motor Company, come up with a new Mustang in 2004? Why didn't they do that 5 years ago? Why didn't General Motors, change their Corvette when I thought they should change their Corvette? These are all business decisions. These are all decisions that are made 4 or 5 years in advance of when the new product is coming out. The first thing that the automotive executives do is they need to review the wants and the needs from the different stakeholders. Stakeholders are the different people in the company that have equity in that business decision. They need to go out and they need to talk on corporate strategy. So what is the corporate strategy? Is there a focus that they want to spend money on the car or a truck or something new? Let me give you an example of this. The problems that we're in here today, the Detroit Automotive 3, is because they felt that over the last 15 years that they wanted to spend more money on trucks than on cars. And why? What is the rationale behind that? The Japanese were focusing on cars. Their cars were pretty good. At that point in time, 10 or 15 years ago, they were better than our cars, no question about that. That's not true today, but at that point in time, they were better. They're actually a little bit less expensive than our vehicles. And the American consumer was leaning toward a larger vehicle. He wanted something larger. A new segment came out called Sport Utility Vehicle, and that seemed to grasp. More and more people were buying trucks and using them to drive back and forth to work. That seemed to grasp. And there was no competition in that area. The Japanese did not compete in the truck area. And we'll go back one step further. Why not? Why didn't they compete? Why didn't they import trucks at that point in time prior to them putting their plants here? And it's a simple little thing that's called the chicken tax. And about 20 or 30 years or 40 years ago, and I'm not even sure when, there was a little bit of a reef between the United States government and a European series of countries, and it was centered around chickens, of all things. And a bill got passed that said, bringing trucks into this country will incur a 25% tariff. And it was a result of us exporting our chickens to that country that they posed the tax on the exportation of our food into that country. So as a result of that, we ended up with the open market here for trucks. Foreigners couldn't really compete. They had a 25% tax, and there was an open market for the U.S. automotive industry to go into the truck markets. They became very popular. They were in vogue. Everybody wanted them, and they were extremely profitable. So going back to focus on car or truck, they focused on truck. They let the cars go a little bit, which now has come around and really bit us back really bad, because there needs to be a lot of product out there in the car area today and in the future. Operational business plans. Review the business plans of the different segments to obtain top priorities. And, you know, when I started writing this, I said, well, they may not know what segments are. So we're going to talk about segments a little later, which is the classification of cars. But this is part of the decision on what to do next. Review the sales and marketing strategy. What does your sales and marketing division want? What are they looking for? What do they feel is necessary out in the marketplace? A cheap vehicle? Do they want to take a large vehicle and strip it down and sell it? Or do they want a fully equipped luxury vehicle out in the marketplace? This is sales and marketing, then, as one of the stakeholders that has to contribute to the final decision. The manufacturing strategy. What's available in the plants? A normal plant can produce about 300,000 vehicles a year in a good plant. That's capacity. Break-even point usually, which means, okay, at what point are they going to make money in that plant? Usually around 2/3. So if they're not producing 200,000 vehicles, they're not really going to make any money. So they want that plant to at least produce 200,000 vehicles. And as you increase production over that 200,000 mark, then you really start making the plant efficient and start making money. So if you've got a plant in Atlanta that is only at 100,000 units, then you want to fill that plant with another product, all right? And you want to put a product in there that's going to increase the sales of that plant to its capacity, which is about 300,000 again. Technology strategy. What technology needs to be in these vehicles? There's a technical team out there saying, okay, the next generation vehicle needs to have certain technical capabilities. I think this morning and yesterday there was some discussion on stability control. And, you know, I don't know exactly why the discussion went, but it's been in the news last night, it was in the news this morning. Electronic stability control. So maybe you don't know exactly what that is, but it sort of adjusts the car so that it doesn't get out of control. It's kind of the second generation of automatic braking, where people maybe are aware today of ABS, automatic braking system. When you step on the brake, you don't let go. It takes the rear wheels and it goes on and off in the rear wheels. Well, automatic stability control or electronic stability control basically controls another variant in the automobile so that you keep it under control. It's an option in many vehicles, and it's standard on the luxury vehicles, and now they're going to make it standard on SUVs. So that's a technology that, okay, all vehicles in the future must have, this type of technology. Design strategy and trends. What's the next design strategy? Those of you that have studied cars, there's the cab forward. Cab forward is putting the passenger as far forward as you can in the vehicle. All right, that kind of was in vogue, and Chrysler picked that up. Chrysler has now, Chrysler also is one of the leaders in automotive styling in terms of being, on the next edge. They've picked up this very mammoth-looking vehicle that is the Chrysler 300. And the story was told to us at lunch here a couple of weeks ago by the leading designer at Ford Motor Company on his conception of why that Chrysler 300 is really desired. Yes, it's kind of interesting looking, but he says, hey, there's a psychic behind that. After 9/11, people wanted to be protected. They felt that they needed something around them to be protected. And that vehicle has very high, what we call belt. Where the window is small, the size of the door is pretty high up, and it's got a very mammoth, heavy look to it. So it's almost like you're in a tank. And his theory is that helps with the sales of this vehicle, because the psychic here is that you're driving a very protected vehicle. That was a very interesting understanding of that. I never thought of that ever. I think about style and design, but I never thought about that. The Mustang is very traditional in terms of design. It's got that huge hood in the front, same as the Corvette. So those are design strategies. What should the next car or vehicle have in terms of design strategy? What's in vogue right now is these crossover vehicles. Right? So crossover vehicle is a blend between a sport utility vehicle and a car, somewhere in between. Some of them look like station wagons. Some of them will look like the same station wagon that was around in the 70s. And you say, wow, this is sort of like full circle. Yeah, they're a little sportier, they got modern cues to them, but some of them are basically the same station wagon that we knew about in the 70s and maybe in the 80s. But that's one type. Now, another type of a crossover vehicle is a little higher and somewhere approaching that SUV look. But that's a design strategy and trend. External factors. What are the external factors that affect the next decision? And come on in. I'll tell you a little story that's kind of interesting. It doesn't pertain to the United States, but back in about 25 or 30 years ago, there was it was decided to form a group at Ford Motor Company that was actually called External Factors. And External Factors was a division. Actually, it was a staff division. And Ford was contemplating spending, in today's dollars, upwards of $1 billion to put a plant in Iran. Now we think about Iran, okay? That's the country next to Iraq. That's the country that we're kind of like, hey, is that the next problem area of the world? And at that point in time, we were very friendly. The United States was very friendly with Iran. There was a Shah of Iran that this government was very close to. So Ford was about to spend $1 billion over there, and they were going to put an assembly facility, and it was going to make vehicles, cars, and trucks for that whole region. So the external factors team went over there, and they came back and they presented a report to the board of directors of Ford Motor Company that said the country's unstable. There's something going on. We do realize that this country is very friendly with the Shah of Iran, but the country is unstable, and we do not recommend spending money there. There's going to be a revolution. There's going to be something that's going to go on in that country in the next 2 years. Ford decided not to spend the money. 2 years later, they kicked out the Shah of Iran, and they brought in a religious leader. And so If they would have spent the money, they would have lost it. The plant would have been gone. Cash. How much cash is on hand? New car programs, new vehicle programs require upwards of $1 billion and more. How much cash do you have? Where do you want to spend that cash? All these are wants and needs from the different stakeholders of the company prior to making the decision. The next item is the corporate strategies. What do the board of directors want, if any? Again, as we discussed, keep the car segment healthy or keep the truck segment healthy. Again, the trade-off. Keep employment in the U.S. Is that a trade-off? Should we build a plant in the United States? Should we go to a low-cost source? Should we build it in China? Should we build it in Mexico? Where should that next automobile plant be? A lot of discussion these days about China. A lot of discussion about them being the low-cost source, and they are. Their labor is non-existent to what we think labor is today here. Our automotive assembly workers with full benefits are making over $50 an hour. That same person in China is making $1, maybe. Probably even less than that, depending on where it's at. So there's no way to compete from a labor standpoint. But there is a way to compete in terms of technology and automation. The more labor you take out of building that vehicle, the better able that you're going to compete in a world market against low-cost labor sources. And that's the direction that the U.S. automobile industry has been going, and that's the direction that they're going to go into in the future. We're off on a little bit of a tangent, but I'll give you an example. It takes about, in the final assembly of the vehicle, not all of the pre-assembly of the engine and things, but the final assembly of the vehicle is a gauge mark. And it takes about 25 hours in the final assembly of the vehicle in a normal assembly plant. If you can get that automation, it used to be more. If you can get that automation up where it's down to 10 hours, well, then now you've said, okay, 10 hours in the final assembly at $50 an hour, that's $500 of labor versus, maybe $50 in a third world country. Now you're only talking about $400 to $450 differential in the cost there, where when you add in the sub-assemblies and you add in the different components that go into the final assembly line, it's a little bit greater than that, and some people think it's as much as $2,000 today to $3,000 between the cost of building the vehicle in the United States versus the cost of building the vehicle in a low-cost country. So that is a factor on where do you build the next vehicle, how do you be competitive. Again, for low-cost assembly sources and low-cost component sources. The components can be sourced to third world countries and keep the final assembly here. Keep the U.S. plants full. And another one, corporate strategy, is nameplates. Everybody thinks that today maybe General Motors and Ford have too many names. You go into a Japanese dealership, they got 4 or 5 nameplates. You go into a German dealership, you go into a BMW dealership, they got 5. You go into a Mercedes dealership, they got 5. You go into a Ford dealership, there's like 15 or 20. You go into a General Motors, and they've got 3 or 4 different divisions. The cars look very similar to each other, and all the cars have different names. It kind of confuses the public a little bit. There's a lot of overlap. So there's a lot of discussion on nameplates and what nameplates to keep and how to strategize the future on nameplates. Put that over there. Again, as part of automotive strategy, we're going to look at design, strategy, and trends. We'll talk about this a little more now. Cab forward. Wheels at the ends of the vehicle. This is a strategy that is in vogue right now. Put those wheels as far outboard as you can. Have as little overhang on the outside as you can. Make that real tight and taut. And the designers really like that look. I like that look. So that's a car design look. and it boils down what the designers call proportion. They'll look at a vehicle and they'll say, it's got the right proportions or it's got the wrong proportions. If it's got the right proportions, we can deal with it, we can handle it, we can change the design around the proportions. If you go back, and I don't know if you remember these, but maybe after this clash, you'll look at some of the cars that were around in the 60s and the 70s and in the 80s, and their proportions are horrible. I mean, you look at them, the wheels looked like they were when you looked at them and you were looking at the front or the back of them, the wheels looked like that they were set inside. You had fenders coming out around them. It looked like roller skates. Look at the side. The wheels were inside. You had overhangs on both sides. That's a proportion. That's what the designers say. Let's make the proportions right, and then we can work around the style from the proportions. We talked about crossover vehicle, a high vehicle. This is an interesting concept. I presently drive a Montego, which is the same as the Ford 500. And it's not an aggressive styled vehicle, but it falls into this high vehicle. You don't have to get down low. When you enter the vehicle, you enter it very easily. It's got very good entrance ability, which we call ingress and egress. You sit down in the vehicle, that seat sits up high, you got clearer view. It's called a command seating position. This was a lot of thought that went into this. The overall style is kind of bland, but the package of a high vehicle is a very, very interesting concept. And Ford pulled it off. It's not selling as well as they wanted it to sell, but they pulled it off. Similar, a lot of you younger guys, I'm sure, are driving SUVs. That's a high vehicle. You like that. My son is your age, and he likes that. He likes that high, sitting up high, looking at the person next to him, feeling a little bit higher than him, and having that command. Call it command of the road. B-car. We're going to get into sizing of cars. Let me see. We're going to do that next. But Desire is a B car for the United States. This is a small car. We'll call it small for now till we get into the next page. So this is going to be different for us. We're used to large vehicles, but as the fuel economy is improved with smaller vehicles, as the price of fuel goes up, which is inevitable, even though there's going to be ups and downs, driving around in a small vehicle is something that we're all going to have to do more and more of. Maybe not our primary vehicle, but we're all going to be owning smaller vehicles to try to be more fuel efficient over the next decade. In Europe, they have other problems. There's small vehicles in Europe all over the place. Those of you that have been there, I'm sure you've known them, noticed them. Not only do they have what we're calling a B car, they even have a smaller car, the smart car. The smart car is an A car. And because of the cities being very old and the city's not laid out for traffic movement. And I was just recently at the Paris Auto Show about 3 weeks ago. And they had a lot of feature cars, and all the different exhibits had their show cars out there. And they had maybe 4 or 5, 6 cars on their display. And I came up to the Smart exhibit. The Smart exhibit was the same car that they've been building for about 5 or 6 years. A little bit different color variation. But they must have had 40 cars in their stand because they were trying to give the impression that this is a small car. And they packed them in. On the same size stand as everyone else, they had 10 times as many vehicles, just to show how small it is and how they're able to maneuver around the cities with a small car. Again, an A car for Europe. And we talked about sloopy, edgy, long hood, short hood, other design trends. The next item is classification of vehicles. And this is a general classification that everybody uses around the world. A being the smallest. And we'll give examples as we go through this. A is a smart car, is an A. B is like in this country be like a Fiesta. We used to be a Festiva. That's a B car, and there'll be more and more of those. I'm particularly familiar with Ford Motor Company future plans, and there's going to be a B car coming here from Ford in about 3 years. C car is a small sedan. Again, like a Focus. A Focus is a C car. These vehicles are classified by the dimensions of the exterior and the dimensions of the interior. And it's primarily the interior that is the gauge to determine the size of the vehicle, the amount of cubic inch inside the vehicle. A CD family sedan, a CD would be like the new Ford Fusion, is a CD vehicle. A full-size sedan, a D car would be like this Ford 500 or the Mercury Montego is a full-size sedan. A large sedan, E-car is like the Lincoln Town Car. And S would be a sporty, a Mustang would fall in the S category. And luxury, a Cadillac would fall into the luxury category. These alpha terms are general across any automotive company, whether it's Toyota, whether it's General Motors, whether it's Kia, or the new Chinese entries that will be coming here shortly. On the truck side is a half-ton truck, a 1-ton truck, 2-ton sport utility vehicle, just a utility vehicle by itself, and then a large heavy truck. Those are the basic classifications of cars and trucks. These form the segments. For example, what are the segment priorities? The new segment priority basically is now the B segment. And like I said, Ford will have one, General Motors will have one, and Chrysler will have one. Does the small specialty segment want a freshening of the Mustang? So deciding when a vehicle is to be changed and how often a vehicle is to be changed is part of that strategy. The sportier the vehicle, the more often you need to change it. The less sporty or more sedan-type vehicle, you can get by a little bit longer. So the small specialty segment is where the Mustang falls, the new Dodge entry into that, the new Camaro falls into that segment. They want to be changed somewhat every 3 or 4 years. Some change on it every 3 or 4 years. Another priority of the segment, the large segment, we talked about the D segment. Does it need a new full-size car, and why? Again, I'll go back to Ford. Those of you that know the Crown Victoria, that is a large car. That basic platform has been around since 1979. And for a car platform, it's got to be one of the oldest, if not the oldest, car platform that's still in production. Yeah, the outside has changed. They've changed the functionals. Not all of them, but they've changed some of the functionals. But the basic platform has been there. So there's a lot of longevity. And they've tried to get rid of that vehicle on many, many occasions. But the consumers continue to want. There's still a segment of consumers that continue to want that very large car. It's an older segment that continues to want it. The police continue to want it. They really, really like that vehicle for its size and structure. That the Lincoln is off of that same platform, and these executive driving agencies in town all drive the same type of car. They drive that Lincoln. They like that car. They like the stance of it. So actually on the Lincoln, Ford was going to get rid of that in about 2 years. But they just decided that they were going to close down the plant that it's in, but move that basic platform to Canada and continue to build that vehicle because it's still in demand and they can still produce enough of them to be able to make a healthy profit. Again, the demand, does the truck segment want a new crossover vehicle or does it want a new SUV? And it looks like the money here has been going into the crossover vehicles versus coming out with a new SUV. Although General Motors just came out with a new large platform truck that they got a lot of criticism for, but it seems to be going over quite well, and I think it's going to be a success. So the bottom of this is priorities need to be established on what to do when. We need to create a cycle plan that meets needs as possible, meets as many needs as possible. Again, now we go back to sales and marketing strategy. Car penetration, where do you need to be? Do you want to be at 15% of the market in your car penetration? Your truck penetration, where do you need to be in your truck penetration? Again, part of that is the number of entries that you have out there, and then how do you want to advertise it? Where do you want to focus your advertising budget? Usually 8% of your product development budget of a new vehicle is earmarked to advertising. If you're spending $100 million, $8 million is earmarked for advertising. That's a kind of a rule of the thumb. Now, they don't necessarily spend it on that vehicle. They lump it all together, and then the sales and marketing people decide where they want to spend the money. There's also input that's done by the dealer council. The automobile companies talk to their dealers and ask them, what is they're the closest to the consumer. They're the first line to the consumer. You don't deal with an automotive executive. You don't have interface. You have interface with your dealer. So the automotive executives do talk to the dealers. There's a dealer council, and they do try to get feedback to try to understand what are the problems, what's selling, what's not selling, and what does the consumer really want out there. We'll go back over the manufacturing strategy. I'm not moving. There we go. Which assembly plants need more capacity over the next 5 years? Which assembly plants are running below capacity and are over capacity? 300,000 is the magic number. You can push it with overtime, maybe to 350,000. Beyond that, you have to add another plant. As the Detroit automotive companies are closing plants because of overcapacity in this country, and the Japanese and Koreans now are building plants, the basic number of vehicles that are built in this country is still going up. We have a 17 million car park here. 17 million vehicles were built in this country last year, and 17 million will be built in this country this year. So that still the total number of vehicles is about the same. Another manufacturing strategy that's pretty interesting is, can we put a variety of cars in the same plant, which is flexibility. And as engineers, you can think about flexibility. Can you put a small car and a large car and a small truck all on the same line? Now, an assembly plant is divided into a variety of different segments inside the plant. And some segments need some separate identity for the size of the vehicle, and others can be combined. But this is a technological breakthrough to be able to build multiple size vehicles in the same facility. Therefore, you have flexibility in terms of market demand. You still want to meet that 300,000 unit number, but if the market demand says, oh, I need more trucks, you can turn the truck dial and build more trucks. Oh, I need more small cars, you can turn the car dial and build more small cars, still keeping the plant as efficient as possible. Another manufacturing strategy is which assembly plants are recommended for closing. And you've all heard this in the news here the last few months about the U.S. automotive industry closing plants, and they are. They're closing plants for not reasons of just sales, but they're closing plants because some of these plants are pretty old. So there's an economic reason to close the plant because of age, and it would take more money to refurbish that plant than it would be just to close it down and build a brand new, modern facility that you can build the vehicle in less hours than you can in the older facility that is more suitable to the automation that you have in this day and age to be able to be competitive in the marketplace. The most modern plant that Ford Motor Company has is the one in Dearborn. And it's a remarkable plant in terms of being able to build a car in a few hours, and it's a green facility. They even grow grass in the roof, similar to your building over here that's brand new. And so it's very, it meets the requirements of the industry, and it meets the requirements of the environmentalists. There's going to be a difficult decision here on part of the OEMs, again, maybe to build the next plant in Mexico because of some low-cost labor there. But as they close these plants, the existing plants become more efficient. You reduce the plants that are building less than 200,000 unit vehicles per year, because below that, they're really not making much money, if any at all. And you're trying to bring together to make at least 300,000 units per plant. And again, you're going back and you're using flexible technology and flexible tooling, so you have a mix in that plant to be able to keep that plant profitable. Technology wants what is necessary in order to compete and be competitive in technology. I know that the consumer says, well, why don't they have this particular feature on the cars? Why doesn't my stereo have an iPod receptor to it in my car? Why don't I have this feature that I see available somewhere else? Well, when you talk about timing of an automobile, it's a minimum of 3 years from the point that you approve the design to the point that you make the vehicle in the assembly facility. Therefore, any technology that you want to go in that vehicle has to be reliable 3 years before the vehicle is actually going to be produced. If you bring in technology if you bring in technology 2 years before the vehicle is going to be introduced, then you've brought in this technology in the middle of the process between engineering a vehicle and producing the vehicle. And when you do that, you run into problems with quality because it's not proven. So the automobile industry is pretty slow. So if the latest bit of technology is not there, it's because that decision on what technology is available was made 3 years ago, and 3 years ago it had to be proven at what we call shelf-ready, concept-ready, shelf-ready projects. It's reliable, it's proven, the technology is there, now we can put it into a car. Some things like integrated front ends, meaning that the whole plastic front end is all integrated together. That's a technology. On the powertrain side, you have variable cam timing. That's an example of a technology which improves fuel economy and performance. Composites for lightweight. You've got a new lab here that you're aware of that's studying carbon fiber composites. It's the same thing. Composite cross member. The structural pieces in a car being made out of carbon fiber or a different type of composite for cost efficiency, for lightweight, and for structural integrity. High-intensity headlamps. These are something some of the newer cars are coming up with these days. Is high-intensity headlamps a new feature in terms of being able to have further ability to see what's ahead of you on the road. And I think there's a couple of vehicles, I'm not sure which one, that I just saw advertised that has the headlamp that they say is going to look around the corner because it's a little bit at an angle. And that's kind of an interesting story because there was a car that they really only produced about 50 of them in the late 40s that was called a Tucker. And the Tucker had one headlamp in the center. It had the two normal headlamps, but a headlamp in the center that actually moved as you turned the steering wheel. Turn the steering wheel to the right, this headlamp would move to the right. So it didn't have the intensity of the high-intensity headlamps today, but it did have the feature. Sandwich steel, this is another technology that's going into the vehicles today. We're actually taking two pieces of steel. As mechanical engineers, you guys can understand this, and you're putting a piece of vinyl in between the two pieces of steel. Therefore, it helps with sound deadenings, so that you have that nice, solid feel. So you can make the metal thinner, and it's stronger, and it's got a lot of sound deadening to it. So that's a technology that is up and becoming in the automotive world, and it's concept ready to be able to put into the vehicles. Other ones, another term is implementation ready projects, such as engine intervention traction control, narrow band active suspension, long travel viscous dampener, and multiplex wiring. These are automotive terms for new technologies in these areas. And every one of these that we've talked about on this page is an invention. Every one of these has study teams within the different automobile companies working on these. There has been, well, at one point it was illegal. It was called collusion. When Chrysler and General Motors and Ford would work on a project together, and the government said, hey, this is collusion. You guys can't work on this project together. You got to do it separate. That's kind of changed. Matter of fact, that's totally changed. So a lot of these projects can be worked on as an industry and not necessarily as one particular company. And as the Detroit automobile companies have to face the rest of the world here in terms of being competitive, we need to do more of that. We need to work on these projects as a team. You need the three together to work on these projects. And there's a lot more technology coming over the next 5 years, particularly in engines, to be becoming more and more fuel efficient. We touched upon external factors, just to review. The political issues, the example I gave you on Iran, the fuel issues. Now with fuel, with the price of oil hitting $80 a barrel this summer, and all of us suffering with regular fuel over $3 a gallon, and now with the price of oil at $55 a barrel, and all of a sudden now we're buying gasoline at $2.20 a gallon, and maybe it's going to drop. There's some guys that are projecting the price of oil per barrel is going to go down another $15 or $20. I don't know. I find that hard to believe. I find that we're going to continue to have gradual increases in fuel. There'll be up and downs, but gradual increases in fuel as the decade moves on. But the vehicle is going to be more efficient. We're going to see more diesels. Diesel technology in this country is what most of us are used to is the diesels in trucks. We see that smoke coming out of the back. We get that diesel smell, and we say, "Oh, why would anyone want to drive a car that has a diesel?" But the diesel technology in Europe is far advanced than what we have here today, and that technology is coming here. It's the same companies. It's Ford, General Motors, and Daimler Chrysler have the same, have the technology that they've decided to put in Europe, because the European community decided that they were not going to be as strict on automotive emissions, particularly with diesels. Puts out carbon. Carbon is an element. It drops to the ground. You know, you can sweep it up. It doesn't really go through the air. United States decided that our environmental controls, that we were going to prohibit that pollutant, where the Europeans allowed that pollutant. So the diesel technology grew quicker and faster in Europe. 60% of the cars in Europe are diesel. They have turbo diesel, and you really can't even tell the difference. I was just there a few weeks ago, and I got into Renault, which is a French vehicle that had a diesel, and I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell if it was a diesel or a gasoline. And it gets 35% more fuel economy than a gasoline engine. And as you go down today, as you go home, you'll see, okay, the price of diesel is about 25 cents a gallon more, as in the United States. And 25 cents a gallon more, so it's rather than you're spending $2.25 a gallon, I think that's what I paid last night for gas, diesel was $2.50. So it's about 10, 12% more, but you're getting 30 to 35% more fuel economy. You're going to see a lot of diesels in this country. And we've conquered, well, I won't say conquered, we've made great progress in the emissions on it, because we're going to what they call a low sulfur fuel. It's going to be available next year, and that will eliminate that carbon pollutant that we're worried about here in this country. So you'll see diesel, what we call penetration, the amount of diesels go up from a couple of percent to 25 or 30% over the next few years. You'll also see ethanol. We talk about ethanol. You've heard the word ethanol. Another fuel that, you know, you could say that this country should have adopted 25 years ago. 25 years ago, the country of Brazil had 100% importation of oil. They had no oil. Now they have a little bit they found here. So they decided they needed to get off of importation of oil. So they went to ethanol. They were the first country that adopted ethanol on a widespread basis. They produce it from sugar cane. They knew that the ethanol per gallon was about twice or three times the gasoline per gallon, but they taxed the gasoline and they subsidized the ethanol. They made it equal. Right now, today, in Brazil, it's, I think, 95% of the vehicles run on ethanol. They don't run on 100%. I think it's maybe 90% ethanol, 10% gasoline. But they don't have a importation oil problem like we have here. So whether it was a Democratic administration or Republican administration, over the last 25 years, this country did not adopt a fuel strategy. And if they would have adopted a fuel strategy that would have said use ethanol and or diesel or a combination of both, we wouldn't have this mess that we have today, because we all know that the automobile is the one that's consuming all of this fuel that's resulting in all of our problems. So there's a lot of fuel issues that are going to be coming about here. The vehicles are going to become more and more efficient, and the environment is going to stay the same because the new fuels will allow that, particularly in diesels. The union issues are monumental, as you've read. They're closing down facilities, they're closing down plants. Our labor base is very high in this country. Is it too high? That's difficult to say, but you know, it is very high. So the union issue is going to be continue to be an issue that the automobile companies are going to have to face. They're going to have to possibly go to some lower wage alternatives, particularly in opening up plants, continuing to open up plants in the Kentucky, Tennessee area where the wages are a little bit less than they are here. So if we can get a combination, if we can get a combination of a little bit lower wages for the assembly worker, combined with a little higher technology in terms of automation, with some vehicles that the consumer really wants, this country can compete. We can compete with any automotive manufacturing company in the world. We'll be able to compete here. Healthcare issues. Healthcare issues are another another factor in why the U.S. automotive companies are having significant problems. The Toyotas and the Hondas, they don't have the same health care issues. They don't supply the same degree of health care. So that makes that amount of what the automotive guys refer to as overhead. That makes that overhead less. Between health care and retirement, there's about $2,000 a vehicle that the Toyota doesn't have and that Honda doesn't have, even though it's built right here in this country, because they have a different health care and they have a different retirement. They don't have a retirement issue. All the people that they've hired have been hired in the last 10 years. Those people are not going to retire for another 25 or 30 years, even if it was an older person that was hired. It's such a small fraction of their employment that it doesn't affect the overall cost of their vehicle. Ford Motor Company, Chrysler, and General Motors have a huge amount of retirement that they have to pay out because of the amount of people that have retired from these companies over the last few years and what's going to retire over the next 10 years. Like, again, between health care and retirement, it's about $2,000 a vehicle. So that means they have to be $2,000 more efficient than the Japanese and Korean competitors to make the same amount of money. Those are external factors. Cash, another part of the automotive business strategy. I don't want you to confuse losses with cash. General Motors and Ford have, and now this last quarter, Daimler Chrysler have said that they all have had losses. Okay, those losses do not necessarily mean that they are not producing cash. Those losses, many of them are an accounting issue, the fact that they're closing plants, they're able to take special tax advantage of some of those items, they're able to take other tax advantages as a result of reducing their labor force. That all falls into making that particular company lose money, but not necessarily cash. So just because they're projecting Ford to lose $5-6 billion a year, their cash reserves have not gone down. They have $23 billion in the bank. General Motors has close to that. I'm not sure what Daimler Chrysler has because it's sort of mixed in with the German portion of the company. So General Motors and Ford are still fairly healthy cash-wise, but they can burn cash. They can burn billions of dollars in short periods of time. So they need to keep this much cash on hand. They need to have $4 to $5 billion a year just to continue their product development. So that's without, if you didn't have, just to continue the research and development for new vehicles. And it's that at a minimum. So you have to bring in then enough cash to have $4 or $5 billion over and above operating costs. That is burn rate, the amount of cash that you need. I have this in the wrong spot, I'm sorry. The amount of cash that you need to keep going from an operations standpoint. Strikes. The big issue was Delphi, right? If Delphi goes bankrupt, it stops producing the parts that General Motors needs to make the cars. Therefore, how long can General Motors survive without producing vehicles? And it probably could survive 6 months, and then that's about it. So it was in the best interest of General Motors to maintain Delphi as an entity. That's why General Motors came in and they bailed out part of Delphi. They came in and they actually said that they will contribute so much of that hourly rate that they wanted to cut the wages of Delphi in order to keep them from going on strike. Because if they went on strike, General Motors would have to close down. I mean, then now you're talking going out of business in about 6 months. The same issue is with Ford and Visteon. Loan capability. The automotive companies have enormous debt, but they have enormous cash flow to pay off that debt. But they finance the cars. General Motors Acceptance Corporation, Ford Motor Credit Company, they basically are banks. So there's some of the largest banks in the world focused on being able to finance a vehicle. It hasn't always been that way. They've really only been in this business actively for 30 or 40 years. Prior to that, you would go to a normal bank to get financing for a car. You wouldn't go to the company that you purchased the vehicle from. It became more in vogue as more and more of us started leasing vehicles, because now the cash that's necessary for the lease the car has to be purchased. That is part of that financial entity within the automotive company, within General Motors, and within Ford, and within Daimler Chrysler. All three have those financial arms. And you probably hear, oh, Ford Motor Company lost $1 billion, but Ford Motor Credit made $1 billion. Well, it's kind of like wooden nickels, right? Ford Motor Credit would not make that $1 billion if it didn't have the cars to finance. So one is not independent of the other. They're connected. In South America, when I was in South America, loans were very, very difficult. They didn't have the finance arms of the automotive industries. The government didn't allow you to borrow money as you borrowed money today. So they formed something in Brazil that was called a consortio. It's a very interesting concept. I don't think it's in existence today, but it was up until about 10 years ago. So everybody in this room, there's about 20 guys in this room, all you guys would form a little group, and you'd be a consortio. And there'd be a management fee, and the management fee would be, some guy would take 1% to manage you guys. All right? So each of you guys, you'd throw in a couple $100 a month into this pot. And every month, one of you guys would get a new car, paid for by the $200 or $300 a month that you're all putting in. So your name would come up in this consortio, and when your time is to get that car. So you're paying in all the time. It's very similar to a lease, but you're owning the vehicle. So you're paying into this self-financing plan, and basically that's what it is, a self-financing plan. And 30% of the vehicles in South America, particularly in Brazil, were financed by a self-financing plan. All of this and this is the last slide we're going to talk about. We're not going to go into section 2. Everything we've talked about so far accumulates in what we call a cycle plan. So now across one side, you have all the different segments. Across the top, you have the years. Now we've got all these things we talked about. Manufacturing constraints, financial constraints, technology issues, cash, external factors. Now you bring it all together and you decide when you need to freshen that vehicle. So this is an example. So your A car. Okay, I'm going to freshen it in year 1. That car does not need to have a lot of change in the styling area because it's a very economical small car. I'm not going to do it again until year 7. That's what the market tells me. That's what my manufacturing plan is. That's what everything that are the constraints within the industry. A B car, I'm going to do it in year 2 and in year 6. So you start to see a balance here, okay? The cycle plan becomes a balance because on the bottom, Here, now you've got cash that you have to worry about. You've got a manufacturing. You want to keep your launches, your new cars, pretty consistent, so you don't have too many in the same year. And if you'll notice that in year 1, I put 4 in there. 2 new and 1 freshening. And right, there's a difference here between an all-new vehicle and someone that you're freshening. In year 2, there's a freshening in a new vehicle. In year 3, there's 2 freshenings. In year 4, there's a major change in a new vehicle. So most automobile companies cannot change every vehicle every year. It's impossible. So you end up with this cycle plan that now is a compromise of everything that you've looked at in what you come up with as an automotive strategy. I'm going to end. We've talked for about an hour. We're not going to go on into section 2 because we'd have to go on for another 45 minutes. And I'm going to open this up to questions.
They used to say they change the cycle plans oftener than they change their size. But how often do they really do the cycle plan?
Cycle plans are changed every Thanksgiving, right now, this week. At Ford Motor Company and at General Motors, they're changed in the fall. This year there may be some delay because there's a new CEO and he's getting his hands into what's going on. I worked in the cycle plan group on and off for several years, and the cycle plan is proposed to the board in November every year, and then the cash plan is proposed to the board usually early in the winter, January, February. Now, there are changes during the year, but every year at this time, the whole cycle plan is reviewed.
I'm being facetious, of course, but there are things that drive the cycle plan changes during the year. What are those things?
Well, money drives it during the year. Money is probably the most important thing that drives it. If you feel that, that change that we were going to do 3 years from now means that I have to spend, if I'm going to do that new Mustang in 3 years, and this is year 1, and I'm going to spend $1 billion, which is about the cost of a new car program, without an engine, without a new engine, well, then I'm going to have to spend $200 million this year, $300 million next year, and $500 million in the last year. Therefore, if I defer that car 1 year, then I don't have to spend that $200 million this year. So it's usually upsets to the cycle plan are normally driven by cash. Now, how much money you need right now to be able to continue. I'm sure you guys got some questions up there. Glenn?
Yeah, well, just a couple questions about the industry in general. I remember when I was a kid, my parents bought a Philco TV, which was owned by Ford. And it said something about the diversification of the industry. They weren't trying to put all their eggs in one basket. They were trying to hold a bunch of companies and a bunch of different industries and therefore diversify themselves. I don't see that in the industry now, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. The other thing is, you at least hear talk in the industry about the companies selling off certain product lines. I think Jaguar's been mentioned recently, selling off Jaguar, which is currently owned by, I forget which one. What's the advantage for them to do that besides just getting cash in?
If you look at this cycle plan, let's talk about the second one first. If you look at this, what we're calling the cycle plan, and you had less nameplates, okay, these segments now are, the way I've done the simplistic view here is I've done it by vehicle segments. But within each segment are multiple nameplates. So if you have in the C-car segment, if you have a Jaguar, if you have a Fusion, if you have a Mercury, if you have a Lincoln version, and if you have a Volvo version, now you've got 5 different nameplates within that vehicle segment. So you have to keep all of those. This is a very simplistic look at a cycle plan. Cycle plan is very, very complicated because now you've got all the nameplates in there when you're going to freshen them, the rationale behind freshening them, the amount of money that needs to be done, and the manufacturing plan. So if you don't have as many nameplates, then you don't have to worry about actually putting them in the cycle plan and having the cash to freshen them, particularly if they're not making any money. And Jaguar, unfortunately, as much as we love that car, and I've driven them on and off for about 10 years, not this year, but and they're wonderful, wonderful cars, and their quality is good, and they're beautiful to look at, and they're sexy image, and everybody likes them. It doesn't make any money. It's never made any money. It's never made any money in 15 years. It's lost a lot of money. So Ford Motor Company says, hey, I got to bite the bullet here. I got to get rid of this Jaguar. And this I don't have to worry about freshening it. I don't have to worry about all these constraints. It'll be more, my life will be more simpler if I get rid of this vehicle line. And in the fact that it's not making any money makes it an easier decision. Unfortunately, there aren't too many people out there that want it. And I'll give you some inside scoop on this. Ford Motor Company paid $2 billion for Jaguar 19 years ago. They've put approximately $8 billion into that company, maybe more, but at least that's more or less $8 billion. So in simple terms, they've got $10 billion in. So just to sort of break even, if they got $10 billion out, they'd say, well, that's too bad of an investment. The Koreans bid $1.5 billion about early this year, January. The Koreans came in and they said, okay, we'll buy Jaguar for $1.5 billion. So simplistically, right, that's an $8.5 billion loss, in addition to all of the losses that operating losses that they've had through the years. There's a Chinese company looking at it right now. I actually met with the president of the Detroit area here yesterday. And I don't think they're going to buy it. I don't think they have the cash. But the Chinese government would back them. If the Chinese government backed them, and they could go in and buy Jaguar. And the Chinese just bought Rover. They bought Rover for peanuts compared to Jaguar. But they bought the English company Rover. And they're going to build that vehicle now in China. So, if I think probably Ford would sell it for maybe $4 or $5 billion. They'd sell Jaguar, and they'd take the loss, and they'd run. That was the second. What was the first one? Okay.
Other product lines besides automobiles.
So I just finished a neat book, and if you guys are really interested in the automotive company, there's a book that's called Billy Durant and Alfred Sloan. It was written earlier this year, and I'm coming back to this because this is part of this. And Billy Durant was the founder of General Motors. And back around 1910, he started to buy companies that were automotive related. And he bought the component companies. Some of the names the Delco, he bought Delco. He bought what we call Saginaw Steering. All right, that's a component. He bought the refrigerator company that turned into Refrigeraire. I'm not sure what it was called at that time. All right, so he went out and he started buying all these component companies. Some of these companies actually then became independent in terms of, hey, we have other technologies. We don't necessarily need to make climate controls for the automobiles. We can make refrigerators. We don't necessarily need to make just radios for the automobile. We can make stereos, Philco. We can make stereos for the consumer. So these companies that, not just General Motors, but Ford Motor Company was doing the same thing. They were buying companies, and they were starting these suppliers, okay? These different branches that were the component sales. They, in turn, became independent in some cases. Let's not sell to the automotive industry. Let's sell to the general public. And therefore, they became independent, like the Philcos, and the Frigidaires, and the Delcos, and so on. Now, there's been a trend that says these captured suppliers, they're captured. They're part of the whole, that they're adding more burden and more cost than if we went out and competitively bid that product. So rather than have a radio, a stereo, a climate control, brakes, that you actually produce yourself, and you have to have the technology to keep those components to the latest level of technology, and whatever cost that they come up with is the cost that you're going to have to pay. Let's go out and let's competitively bid those products among the industry. Because there's 6 radio suppliers in the world, not just the one that Ford Motor Company owns or the one that General Motors owns. There's 6 or 7 brake suppliers in the world, not just the one that General Motors owns. So General Motors and Ford, to a major extent, decided they're going to take all these components and they're going to lump them together, and they're going to say, now you're kind of on your own. That created Delphi. That created Visteon. In Europe, Fiat had a company that was similar that created their division. And then they said, okay, now we're going to make you guys independent, and we're going to now go out and competitively bid these products. So all the problems you're hearing with Delphi and Visteon are basically a result of the fact that now the large companies are now going out and they're saying, okay, you have to be competitive. You have to be competitive with the 6 other brake companies in the world, the 6 other radio companies in the world. Therefore, if you're not competitive, we're not going to source to you. If we're not going to source to you, your volume's going to go down, you're going to become unprofitable, and Delphi is in Chapter 11. Visteon is not there yet. Hopefully it won't go there. And they're basically causing then the supply base to get less expensive, to get work smarter. Does that sort of answer it, Glenn? Okay, other ones. Yes, sir.
Would a major change be like from the Aerostar to the Windstar? What defines a major change versus a new change?
First of all, that was a horrible thing they did. They took one name and they just changed it a little bit and made it another name. And the average consumer doesn't even understand why they changed it from a Windstar to an Aerostar. One of many, many, many decisions the U.S. automotive industry made over the last 15 or 20 years. But what normally classifies the difference between a minor change or a major change is if you get into the structure of the vehicle. If you're only talking about the exterior skin of the vehicle, well then you can call that a freshening, and there's degrees of freshenings too. Right? If you hold the area, the doors. If you hold the doors are very expensive to redo doors. If you hold the doors, you end up holding kind of the area around the door. So that's one level of freshening. If you change the doors, you're almost into a whole new skin. And when you sort of get into a whole new skin, then the engineers are saying, oh, if you're changing that whole new skin, I want to change the chassis of the vehicle, because I've got this latest and greatest chassis that I want to put on there. And then you start rolling, right? And then all of a sudden, one leads into the other, and they're not wrong decisions. They're right decisions. And then you lead into a brand new vehicle because one starts snowballing. So basic criteria is skin is one level of change. If you get into the structure of the vehicle, which is the chassis, that's another level of change. And usually the powertrain is separate. You can change the powertrain independent, normally, of the chassis or of the skin of the vehicle. Why they changed the name on that car? I don't know.
I know.
Okay.
Marketing decision. I was talking to somebody about it. They had a commercial at one time associating the Aerostar with the space shuttle. And of course, the timing was rather poor because of the concept of the difficulties that NASA had. So they wanted to distance themselves from that association.
That's one of many, many decisions that are a mystery. And changing the names. The Taurus became the largest selling vehicle in the United States for 10 years. And then then it started to fall down. They started moving it into the fleets. They had to keep their production levels up. They had to keep 2 plants going. Okay, 300,000 a plant now. So they had to keep 600,000 Tauruses on the road, all right, in order to make it a profitable business venture for Ford Motor Company. So therefore, let's sell it to the fleets cheap. They refreshened the car. They didn't do such a hot job on freshening the car. One thing led to the other. Changed the name. I don't know why they changed the name of the Taurus. I don't know why they came out with a vehicle called Fusion, which is basically a replacement of the Taurus. They could have came out with that vehicle and called it a Taurus. They spent billions of dollars, literally, over 20 years to build up the name. Now they changed the vehicle and they got rid of the name. That's a learning curve that the automotive industry in this country does a lot. Now, if you talk to the marketeer, if you got the sales guy up here in my spot, he'd probably give you lots of rationale on why they did that. But you don't see BMW and Mercedes-Benz changing the name of their vehicle. They come out with a new one. You really don't see the Japanese doing it very much either. Yeah, yeah.
Other questions?
Glenn?
I'll try one more here. In talking to people in the industry, they are bemoaning how long it takes a product to get to the market in the United States. I've heard either 5 years or 7 years, something like that, and they say that the Japanese get the product to market faster. Number one, is that true? And number two, why do you think it is, if it is?
Time to market. Job 1, production of the vehicle at line speed. All right, line speed, 60 units per hour. All right, 60 units per hour equals 300,000 vehicles per year. You make lots of money. Approval of the clay, the style. The style is approved. All right. So this line, I'm going to give you some pieces in between this line, because this is a very interesting thing to talk about. Time to market. This normally, with a good product, is 36 months, 3 years. That's without a new engine. You got another 12 months here if you're going to do a new engine. Okay, so this is engine development. It's also component development. It's also pre-program. This point is a magic point. We talked about why the automotive industry has items in their vehicle that you think are, why didn't they put that new stereo in? Why isn't that iPod connector in there? Why don't they have that latest headlamps that I can go, to the store and get? It's because in order to be able to produce 60 per hour, 300,000 per year in an assembly plant, the automotive industry feels it has to be ready. That component has to be, the invention is over. It has to be reliable. It has to perform at 3 sigma. I think you guys are learning what that is. 3 years in advance. That engine, that new diesel engine, that new ethanol engine, that new twin turbo, that new fancy fuel injection system has to be completely done 3 years in advance. Now, why does it have to be completely done? Why does it have to be shelf ready at that point in time? Because from here forward, usually around 6 months before job 1, you actually have prototypes that you can put into the plant to be able to start the manufacturing process. So these guys that are putting this thing together need to practice how to put this vehicle together. So they need to practice their process. They need to practice their process with a vehicle that is basically the final vehicle. Yeah, the engineers are running, they're making minor changes and stuff, but all the major things are the same. How to put this car together so you can put it together at 60 per hour. So you can put it together at 17 hours per car. So you can put it together and have a first-run capability that's 95% plus. Because you have, if your quality is not there, then you're into that whole new category of how do you get your quality there, you know, dissatisfaction with the consumer, and all of the issues that the U.S. automotive industry now finally has a vehicle that is comparable or better than the Japanese. In the paper here, we've seen the new Fusion as being the #1 quality car in the United States, according to some surveys. You know, the American cars are right there with the Japanese, and that's because they've defined a process, and they've held that process. They've defined the fact that they need to practice on putting this car together, because this is line speed. Job number 1 is line speed. It's 60 hours, 60 cars per hour. Here they may start at 1 car per hour, 3 cars per hour. These vehicles are not even sellable vehicles. They end up going in for crash tests and other things, or they get thrown away. Some of them, towards the end, are sellable vehicles. Now let's back up some more, okay? Now usually around halfway, 18 months, okay, we have another level of prototype, which is an engineering prototype for simplistic reasons. The engineers are done at this point, okay? They've been engineering this car for 18 months. They've engineered the fenders, they've engineered the package, they've engineered the seats, they've engineered the chassis, okay, because all that stuff here is only a clay, right? It's only something that looks pretty. It's a style, whether it's made out of clay or whether it's virtual. Some of them are virtual. It's still not made into a vehicle. So they have about 18 months to make it into a vehicle. At this point in time, they have a vehicle that they're satisfied with. It's got prototype parts on it. It runs right. It meets the package requirements. It meets the size requirements. It meets the fuel economy requirements. It looks pretty good. They've gone out and tested it again with the public. So that's an engineering prototype. They sign this thing off. All right. Now the manufacturing guys have between 18 months and 6 months to build the tools in the factory, right? You got to build the tools to put this thing together. So you put that all together, and there's a lot of points in between, and there's a lot of disciplines right now, which they call milestones, all right, at different points. This is a very simplistic view of this, and you have to buy off at those milestones, but basically whether you're doing it in Japan, whether you're doing it in Europe, or whether you're doing it in the United States, it's pretty much 3 years from the time you approve the clay to the time you do it on job 1. Some people say they can do it in 28 months. That's a stretch. I did the Mustang program in the 90s in 31 months. This point was not 36, it was 31 months. But I had, at this point, I had basically a carryover chassis. And I had a carryover engine. I just did a new body. But I still had all the constraints of building the prototype, building all the engineering, and actually, you know, putting it in the plant. Okay.
Other questions?
External factors. I was in California a couple of years ago, and out there I noticed that a lot of the cars that people are driving are foreign vehicles, Japanese, Toyotas, and Hondas. And I think that has to do a lot with emission standards in California. So my question is, for external factors such as like political emission standards, things like that, I mean, just this year President Bush is finally saying we're addicted to oil, and now he's promoting ethanol and hydrogen in the future and whatnot. Is the big three, the American companies, are they going to wait till, okay, maybe the next administration will put some emission standards or some type of standards on vehicles, or will they look at it now and say, okay, maybe in the future these standards will be there, and we have to think about this now, because there's a 5-year wait until this vehicle comes out, or do they wait till that actually happens, to some political external factor forces them to do that?
Well, the emission standards have been gradually getting stricter and stricter over the last, say, 10 or 15 years. You know, there was the big push, and then they're just gradually getting stricter and stricter. And, you know, in the industry, there's different levels of that. But actually, what's becoming accepted as the criteria for it, it's called Euro. The Europeans are at, you know, Euro 3. This is emission levels. Euro 4, Euro 5, and now I think we're at Euro 7. All right, so that's sort of a standard that has been on emissions. All right, so it's sort of a gradual thing. It hasn't been something that the government says, okay, next year you're going to have to meet a different emission standard. In terms of fuel economy, they adopted an average fuel economy of the fleet of 27.5 miles per gallon. This has been in existence for maybe 15 years. It's been a long time. All right, so this is the fleet. This is everything. This is everything from the A car, right, all the way down to the E car. That does not include trucks. Okay, this is only cars. And the automotive companies then are faced with a mix issue too. These all together have to meet 27.5. So at some point in time, they say they have to build a certain percentage of these size vehicles, a certain percentage of these size vehicles, and a certain percentage of these size vehicles. And the profitability, you know, as you get more luxury and usually larger, gets more and more profitable. So there's a balance here. Now, to go back to your question specifically, there is a lot of talk in Washington that they're going to increase this 27.5 to something greater than 27.5 to force the automotive industry to improve the fuel economy even further. And there are technological things that are in place right now that probably can achieve something greater than 27.5, combined with a little smaller vehicle that's a little lighter, combined with more modern materials like carbon fiber. There's some engine things that are called direct injection, which is fuel injection. Okay, it's just a more sophisticated fuel injection system on a gasoline burning car that's going to get maybe 20% more fuel economy, and that's probably going to happen right around 2009. BMW's got one on the road right now. Okay, BMW has a direct injection in a gasoline engine that meets this new fuel economy, you know, of 20% more on the road right now, but it's very expensive. As you need to get this, you know, to $1 million a year to be able to get it down, to be able to put it in a vehicle that you go out and spend $25,000 for versus a BMW at $80,000. Again, what's going to help, you know, this is kind of driven now because now you know, last week, right, the Detroit 3 CEOs were in Washington, right, and they're pushing ethanol. Okay, let's kind of maybe ignore 27.5 or not increase it to 30. Let's 30 miles per gallon. Let's change the fuel. Ethanol is not as efficient as gasoline, but it doesn't come from oil. It comes from corn. So let's, you know, we're the largest farming in terms of producing grain and corn in the world by far. Now, converting corn and grain to ethanol is not as efficient as sugarcane like they do in Brazil, but okay. The break-even point, you know, depending on who you talk to, is somewhere around $3 per gallon. At $3 per gallon, ethanol is what it costs. Okay, so today you're producing, you know, you're going out there and you're paying $2.25 per gallon for gasoline. So why would you want to go to ethanol? Every day you're going to go in there and you're going to put gasoline in your car. But I guess if they subsidized this a little bit, or they added a little bit of tax, made these about the same like they did in Brazil, then that takes the decision out of your hands, right? Now you don't really care because it's the same price. Fuel economy is about the same, but again, it's not oil, right? Oil is the issue. So, and as our farm machine moves into place, we're the most efficient farming society in the world, you know, I think that number can come down, right? As we move to ethanol refineries, as we convince our farmers, you know, to produce corn rather than pay them for not producing, that number should be able to come down.
So over the next maybe 5 to 10 years, can we expect to see maybe a phasing out of just the standard gasoline engines to these E85?
I think that you will see I think you'll see a significant increase in diesel and a significant increase in ethanol. And in 2015, that probably, you know, as a guess, over 50% of the vehicles in this country will be running on ethanol and diesel. Hydrogen is a stretch, okay? Hydrogen is possible. There's a fleet, the company that I'm working for now, which is a heavy-duty engineering company, we've got a fleet of hydrogen vehicles that we're doing for Ford Motor Company, but it's a ways off. It's a minimum of 10 years away.
I don't recall what industry the guy worked for, but I was talking to someone who he thought that the biggest hurdle for ethanol wasn't cost, it was just the sheer amount you'd need, and there wouldn't be enough product in the world to both feed and produce fuel. Is that a concern or not really?
I don't know. That's supply and demand, isn't it? Right? I think there's a lot of growing capability in this country. I guess I've never looked at a study, and this is not my area of expertise, that says we do not have the capability of growing enough corn to produce enough fuel to replace a good percentage of our oil consumption. Even if it was only 20%. We know we have enough to do 20%. I don't know if we have enough to do 100%. But clearly we have enough to do 20% or 30%. You know, we still produce oil in this country. We still produce a lot of oil in this country. We just don't produce all of the oil that we consume. So I don't know. But supply and demand really is a big deal. If there's a demand for it, somebody's going to figure out how to make it.
I think we've heard a lot today, and I applaud our speaker for having a